Welcome to the Sword and The Trowel. It's a podcast of Founders Ministries, and Founders exists for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of local churches. And I'm Tom Ascol, and I'm delighted to have you join with us again this week. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Mark Coppenger, who's an old friend and who has been teaching at the Institute of Public Theology here this week, and will be teaching another course in just a few weeks. Mark has been stepping in due to some difficulties we have with travel arrangements and getting Vody Balcom over here, so he and Vody Balcom have wound up team teaching the Cultural Apologetics course for the Institute of Public Theology. And beginning in February the 14th through the 18th that week, he will be teaching an Introduction to Philosophy class that you can sign up for. You can just go to the instituteofpublictheology.org and get more information there. The week before that, on the 7th of February, Conrad Mbewe will be here teaching a course on preaching. So again, for more information, just go to the website. You can get to it from founders.org or the Institute of Public Theology.org. So, Mark, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Yeah, I appreciate so much this class that you are teaching on cultural apologetics, and I've been able to sit in on a little bit of it, but I've talked to the students, and man, everybody's so excited and grateful for your willingness to come and do what you've done, especially on such short notice and with such excellence. And I've described it to our people here and to the students. It's like, you've got Aaron Rodgers, who's scheduled to be your starting quarterback, and he gets sick and he can't make it for the first two quarters, and so Tom Brady says, well, I'll step in. And so Tom Brady comes in, and the team's going forward with full force, and so it's been great. So thanks so much.
Very kind. And I tell you, I mentioned I woke up in the middle of the night here, and I had something to do, and I just worked for a couple of hours and ran on short sleep, and I was thinking, I wonder if I'll be draggy. And this class, these guys energized me. I mean, I thought I was going to run past, make heaven if I didn't run past it. It was so exhilarating to be these students. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, it's been a joy, and you've been serving them very well. So grateful for that. I also want to just thank you too for your Wield the Sword episode on aesthetics. And there's a lot of good lines in that. If you haven't watched that, you can find that on our Founders YouTube channel, or just go to Wield the Sword on the Founders website and you'll get there. But one of the lines in there, and talking about aesthetics in ways that I typically don't think about, but that all of us ought to be thinking about as Christians, is you're talking about serving up oatmeal. So put a little raisins in the oatmeal. Make it tasty.
It wasn't totally original, but I didn't know the source to cite. But yeah, I just think those examples sure do help. Illustrations help.
Yeah, well, they do. And God has gifted you and used you in so many ways across so many years. I was trying to remember with Donna earlier this week, and just mentioned to you, I think I met you for the first time at Southwestern Seminary. Our years there overlapped a little bit back in the late 70s, early 80s. And we had at least one class together, and I did not know who you were, but I knew that the professors knew something about you that they didn't know about me, or I didn't have for them to know. And I found out later that you had graduated from Vanderbilt with a PhD in philosophy and had already taught, I think, right? Had you been teaching at
6 years at Wheaton?
At Wheaton.
And a year at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so here's a professor that has taught at Vanderbilt and Wheaton, PhD in philosophy. He's coming to do an MDiv at Southwestern. And I thought, well, man, that is a wonderful mark of humility, and what an opportunity to have you in that class. And anyway, so since then,
kind. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been neat to just kind of track with you, and you were very much involved in the conservative resurgence. You got to see some of the things a little bit behind the scene. You were telling me just a moment ago that you were church members with Harold Lindsell.
Yeah.
Right? Up there while you were at Wheaton. So, I mean, there's just all kinds of things that God has exposed you to and used you in. So tell us a little bit about your journey from, even getting into philosophy and how you did that, and then what you've done since then.
Okay, yeah, that's an odd discipline, but my dad was a pastor and college teacher, got his doctorate in church history from Edinburgh. Wrote on Abraham Booth, and so he was teaching in Baptist colleges. I'm a little Baptist college prof's kid, and he was at Cumberland in Lebanon, Tennessee when it was Baptist. And then Belmont College, Carson Newman, Ouachita. And what they were doing back in the day, they didn't have many trained philosophers, so they would get guys with Bible backgrounds or church history and draft them to teach philosophy. And a lot of them were actually committed to liberating their kids from their Sunday school teachers' naivete. And so they were, here's some existentialism, and this is deep, and, let's go here and there. He wasn't like that, but he was drafted, and we would do summer things. He would go and up his training philosophy at George Washington University or Colorado Boulder and the like, and we'd travel along. So he was serious about it, but I was just intrigued. And it was the 60s, and things were going crazy. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if you could talk the language of the cool secularist or something, and then have a Christian witness? I mean, it was kind of like a missionary thing. But I remember once we were going off on a family trip, and he started talking about, and he started talking about the Communist Manifesto and the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and dialectical materialism. I thought that was the coolest thing. So I was kind of intrigued, and so I got the degree, and then I went on to Vandy, and I worked for the National Endowment for the Humanities in Vanderbilt. But then I went to Wheaton and taught full time, and then I got the growing sense that God wanted me to be a pastor. And so it was funny. I was in Don Whitney's church at the end. He had come up to pastor, and I felt a little bit like the guy on the bench. And I said, "Put me in, Coach. Put me in." I mean, there are a variety of things that came to pass. I was more excited about teaching Sunday school than I was lecturing on Kant or something too. Yeah. But anyway, so I went to seminary and pastored a legacy church in Arkansas, First Baptist El Dorado, and then became a denominational servant, as they say, and worked with the Indiana Convention and the SBC Executive Committee and Midwestern and different things. Yeah. And then was a church planner. But I have to tell you, I came late to understanding the whole inerrancy thing and to get mixed up in that. And just very quickly, when I went to Wheaton, they had a doctrinal statement. And I didn't know what some of the stuff meant. I mean, there was something about premillennial, and I didn't know what that meant. And I still am mystified, I have to say. This is not fair, but I say sometimes I believe the last thing I read on that. I did a paper once on for ETS on the mystery of the Old Testament is the gospel for all the nations by grace and faith. And the mystery of the New Testament is the eschaton, I think. But at any rate, the thing that really puzzled me, was verbal plenary inspiration. And I know what verbal means, and I think I know what plenary means and inspiration, but I called my dad, and I said, "Dad," and he said, "You believe that." and he was right, And so that's when I was introduced to inerrancy. Yeah. And then I heard in that little church there's some kind of rumblings here and there about something's going on in the convention. See, I was there 75 to 81. And so Adrian was elected in 79. Yeah. Things were rumbling down there somewhere in Dixie. And I thought it was kind of not a good thing or something, like the barbarians were at the gate from what I heard. Yeah. And one thing led to another. And I finally am down at Southwestern, and I'm here and there. It was a good education. I was drinking from a fire hose of understanding. But they started taking shots at different things. I had one professor question whether there was actually a city at Ai, or whether there could be that many Israelites in the Sinai. Just little, and I think, wait a second, it says it right here. Yeah. And I thought, and then I thought, there really are some people who are not very keen on biblical inerrancy here. And so I became a pastor, and I started to preach through books and the like, and I found out my predecessor was undermining things too, and then I was standing out. They thought I would be more liberal because I had a philosophy degree. I thought they would be more conservative because they were in Arkansas, and boy, did we get a surprise. And so then they had the Peace Committee, and I wrote them, and I was starting, and then I went on the board at Southern, and I looked at their doctrinal statement, and then I found out one of the faculty members up for tenure was saying that you can have postmortem evangelism, and that other religions are like a stairway up to find Jesus and all this. And I thought, things really are crazy. Yeah. And when I was a pastor, I got a call from a Southern Seminary prof who said, I want you to lobby against a referendum that denies state funding, Arkansas funding, to abortion. And I thought, why do you think I care? What is that? But I'd written a book and done a book in bioethics, and I guess he figured I was philosophy, so I was liberal, and I was on board. And I said, no, I mean, I hope the thing passes. And so it just kind of incrementally, and then one thing led to another, and I found myself in the soup up in Indiana, gladly, and I followed a guy, this is more than you want to know, but I followed a guy named David Simpson, who was editing the Indiana Baptist, and of all the state papers, he was the guy who was saying the inerrancy cause is worth it. And so they said, be sure we keep that tradition going. And so I started writing columns. We brought Tammy and Gary Ledbetter up there. They did that, and we stood out, and one thing led to another. Jerry Vines had me chair a resolutions committee in '89 in Vegas, and it's just like, well, duh, it's the Bible. This is what it says. And I thought how astonishing it is that people would differ from that and would be explicit about it, and we're paying for paying their salaries. So I was on board.
Yeah. And by God's grace, I mean, that happened. We saw things reverse. And you and I have talked a little bit about the way things are now in the SBC. And of course, I'm convinced we need another movement. We need another correction of the course that we're on. Right. And some people think that that's not possible, or it's too far gone, or it's a fool's errand to try. But man, there were some really bad things going on back in the 70s and 80s in the SBC. People are shocked to learn that the predecessor of the ERLC, the Christian
CLC became ERLC.
That the Christian Life Commission. Yeah, that they actually advocated for abortion for Roe v. Wade, and that.
It was the oddest thing. And when I chaired resolutions, I went back and read all these old resolutions from years back, and I was astonished that around 73, 74, they were kind of copacetic with it. Like, that makes sense. And I was, what?
I know. So we have that, and I remember there was one professor at Southern Seminary that whenever he was a theology professor, whenever he would begin his lectures about the Scriptures, would take a copy of the Scriptures and walk to the front of the class and throw it in the garbage can.
Yeah,
that's how he began.
Bizarre. That is so bizarre.
So we had a lot, and denying the literal resurrection of Jesus, and beyond a historian's competence to know, Glenn Henson said, whether Jesus ever came back from the dead. And
I knew it's crazy. And then I had the Broadman commentary, and I know he kind of tried to finesse it, but he said, the axe head goes in at the prophets, and they stir it, and it floats, and he says, this shows how myth and saga overlay. Like, well, what do you mean there? Yeah. And that was in the Broadman commentary.
That was the revision.
That was the revision. You're right. That's exactly right. And then, I think Francisco came. You had a Brit, right? The first Genesis. I mean, they had passed scrutiny. I was in Indiana, and things were very raw. I went into Indiana as the exec in 88. And things were very raw, and one of the guys there, he's kind of taking umbrage at my being critical of some of the seminary stuff. And he said, well, come to think of it, when I was at Southeastern in this case, he said, a professor said the miracle of the loaves and the fishes came when the little boy shared his lunch, and everybody was impressed with that and inspired, and they shared their lunches, and it was a miracle of like mutual and it was like, what? But that stuff was going. And so anyway, it was a definitely righteous cause, I have to say.
Yeah, things were bad, and there are many of us that think that things are not good now, that our trajectory is not good. And up until about 5 years ago or so, one of the things I could say to people who would point out about problems in the convention is, well, okay, it's a big place, big convention, lots of churches, and the trajectory's good. We've got a better trajectory than we've had, and we keep kind of moving in the right direction. And I can't say that anymore.
Yeah, it's very troubling. It's a troubling time. I'm astonished, and you look at the march of liberalism and everything. All institutions seem to drift secular, and we might have had 50 plus state colleges, and a lot of them become secular. And I use the notion of a helicopter where you have the main rotor that lifts it, but that tail rotor pushes against the torque, the augury. And if it's not pushing like conservative commitments every day, that thing spins out of control. It has to push against the tendency, and the tendency is to like lose it and become non-biblical, essentially. And so I thought we had it kind of wrapped up for a while. It only takes one generation, actually, to lose it. And I could kind of understand people doubting the Bible. There are all kinds of books that say, oh, look at the harmony. It doesn't quite match up. You had a guy in ETS that says it says the Sermon on the Mount here and the Sermon on the Plain here and and that kind of thing, as if he couldn't have preached the same sermon twice, or plain can mean level place on top of the mountain. But at any rate, they're always pecking away at that. But it seemed to me that after the civil rights movement, for example, and where you can't discriminate on the basis of this and that, and Martin Luther King and all this, I thought, well, we got that. And then out of the blue, people are buying into this critical theory, which is like perpetual insolence, perpetual resentment, dividing everybody into oppressor and oppressed. And even if you're not consciously or so, it's subtle. It's almost like a Freudian thing. It's not falsifiable. I mean, you can just say it. There's nothing can count against it. And then we're always talking about wounds and safe places. And I think, boy, you should have lived in the 50s. What are you talking about? Yeah. I mean, it's like the Princess and the Pea, if you know that. You remember, is she really a princess? We'll put a garden pea underneath all these mattresses, and in the morning, if she has a backache, then she's bound to be a princess. And she did. And so it seems to me we pride ourselves on our little aches and hurts and pains and affronts, and that doesn't seem Christian. And then the 10th commandment tells us not to covet, and it just seems that's been turned into a high art.
Right.
And I don't know. It's just there's no end to it. It's kind of like COVID now. It's like, what are we going to be wearing masks 3 years from now? Like, at what point do we just love brothers? But they've imported this thing, which is the Marxist understanding was economic, and then now we're going to make it social. And they've bought it, and I think, are you crazy? Because I've seen people speak against, like, you got to be careful with yoga, or you got to be careful with this, or whatever, and they're watchdogs here and there. And then to me, sometimes I think about that old scam on the internet where it's the Nigerian prince, and he says, hey, I've lost track a little bit. If you'll just give me this money, then, it'll all work out. And I think people fell for that. I feel badly, but they fell for critical theory, and then all kinds of woundedness about gender and it's just like I just like, did this really happen? And it did. Yeah. And it's kind of infectious. And by the way, the mechanisms to preserve it are powerful, because you have all these insults. I mean, you're phobic this, you're racist, you're whatever. Nobody wants to be that. And now social media's there, and it's just like, they'll cancel you, they will kill you, this and that. And so we have a lot of terrified people who are doubting themselves. And somehow or other, some of our leaders have bought into it. Yeah. That's just baffling to me.
Me too.
It's like, I can sell you beachfront property in Kansas.
I know. It was so confounding to me and disorienting for a while. Yeah. And finally, what finally helped me is I said, okay, I'm just going to put a bag over everybody's face. I'm going to forget who it is that's saying it. I'm just going to look at what they're saying, what they're doing, what they're writing, and how they're responding. And you say, this is not bad, this is not right, this is bad, this is not right. And then you pull the bags off and you say, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's you.
It's not some compound outside Waco or something. I mean, it's it's hard to believe.
It is hard, and it's disappointing. And where I've kind of come down, Mark, is though, thank God for all the good things that all of our leaders have done across time. Yeah. I think it's time for new leadership. I just think we need new leadership across the board. Yeah. And I'm disappointed in Ed Litton, and I don't know him personally, but I don't know how he could continue trying to even serve as a pastor, or especially serve as a pastor, given the things that have come out that he's obviously guilty of.
Yeah. That is surprising. I mean, I've been a teacher a long time. I remember when we finally discovered Boolean searches, where you put quotations mark around, and so somebody might write a paper. I've seen this even at Southern, but at Elmhurst College, I can remember exact cases where someone will write something, and I don't think they know those words, or that doesn't sound quite right, and they might have like the, eleemosynary conjunction of the confluence or something, and I thought, I've been with you all semester long. You don't talk that way, so you put that around, and bingo, it comes out of a journal or something, and they stole it from an encyclopedia. And so that's a bad place to be when this happens. So it seems to me really misleading. And a couple of things seem kind of crazy. One of the best times I had as a pastor was preparing sermons. I mean, put the commentaries out there, and I go through the text, and I have a little thing I write initial. It's just my first little reaction, like, what do you mean purge with hyssop? What's hyssop? Or something like that. And I'll write all the questions down, bombard it with questions, as Scott Tatum taught us at Southwestern. And then I go to the commentaries, and I imagine people around the table, and they're counseling me, but wrestling with it, and letting the illustrations come, and the analogies and the like. And that's a lot of spiritual growth. And to just forego that, and then in a funny way, it strikes me that it's a great thing to give reference. I mean, my own son in his preaching will say, look, I got this from Charles Spurgeon, or this comes from, whatever. And it's like, wow, this guy's doing his work. And so it's a way of, I would say, burnishing your work and stuff. And then just take it word for word. It's that, again, astonishment. Really? I didn't even know there were these people who sold sermons. And I do remember being a little bit surprised. I was a graduate student, and we were interviewing somebody, not we, but our church was interviewing someone in Nashville, and a young guy to work on staff, and he was sort of explaining that he didn't do Saturdays or didn't do this or that or whatever, and putting hedges around. I'd rather not do hospital or this and that, and I kind of thought, well, what do you want? I mean, do you want to do the pastorate? And I feel the same way with this. What is it you think you're doing?
Right.
It is baffling to me.
Yeah, it is. And then just to see kind of how nonchalant so many have been about it. And it's an indication, I think, of just kind of how bad things have really grown in the convention. And so,
and by the way, you talked about new leadership. I think that there is a movement afoot to find new, cool leadership that's appealing to the Utes. I was in a National Guard unit with a lot of Polish guys in Chicago, and they said, the Utes, you got to watch the Utes today. So anyway, it's like, oh yeah, we got to get this guy. He'll be attractive, and we got to get those generations. And like, what about just getting someone who's like really sensible and godly, and if he's got the hair like the snows of Hermon or something, fine. Or if he's 22 and he's David Brainerd, just pick somebody, but don't do it as a PR move,
right,
or as a defensive PR move. The world is watching. We've got to come up with something not offensive, and they're like, what is that?
Yeah,
give us godly, solid people.
Amen. Yeah, and I don't think there's a way out of this apart from that, and churches recognizing it, and pastors especially. I really think it's going to fall on the shoulders of pastors. Either we're going to lead or we're not, and going to say, okay, look, we're a convention of a lot of churches and a lot of people, and we're not going to see eye to eye on everything, but there's some things we just simply cannot back away from. We've got to stay here, and our convention's designed for change to happen. It's not designed to happen quickly. But it can happen, as we saw in the conservative resurgence. But it won't happen unless we get a president elected who's willing to make the appointments and to hold the line. And
no, I agree. I mean, that's part of the genius of the thing, that the guy has a committee on committees, committee on nominations, and that there's a trickle-down thing. And at Southern, we typically gave the other guys their second 5-year term. It was a slow turnaround, but it was absolutely necessary, but doable. And when I was at Wheaton, I came in contact with a lot of denominations that would have a more exalted kind of leadership, whether it was the presbytery or this, working up the line, and they kind of ran things. But for us, it's just like, as someone once said, well, I won't repeat it, but it's just the common kind of guy. You can load 10 folks in a van, and they can sleep in it overnight, drive down from Waxahachie or Waxahachie and vote, and then get back to the mill by by supper, and that was wonderful. It was a populist kind of movement. And by the way, there's Herschel Hobbs. I interviewed him for a book, a little chapter in a book. And he was talking about back in the days when you had two grandees from Atlanta or something, and they were wearing spats or something at a convention and sitting on the platform, and people are taking the mics and barking here and there. And by the way, on resolutions, we get some interesting resolutions against the Elvis stamps or the sequin choir robes, or support NASA so we could evangelize outer space. I mean, it's the greatest show on earth. And the guy said, this is unseemly, and the other guy patted him and he says, listen, he says, you want you want the little dogs to hunt, you got to let them bark. Well, that's condescending, but there is a point there that we need to let people have their say.
Yeah.
And their say, I think, is increasingly, what in the world are we doing?
Yeah.
And I think we need to have a fresh say in Anaheim.
I agree. I hope it happens because I feel very sad and frustrated about Nashville.
Yeah.
And constantly it just seemed like the efforts were thwarted every time there was a desire from the floor of the convention to try to speak to something that wasn't the narrative. It just got shut down.
2 years in a row, like they finessed, as you say, we've been played in Birmingham, and then, okay, now we're ready, and we got 1,000 signatures on this thing. A lot of times it just takes one or something, and we'll take it seriously. And there was a preponderance of interest in saying, can we set this record straight? We messed up.
Yeah.
And boy, they finessed it and then abused us along the way. And so I this is a weird thing, but I'm kind of encouraged by how CRT is being doesn't have a good shelf life in America. And I think of the Loudon school board and other things. And I don't think this madness that has come has a good shelf life. I mean, you can maybe keep it rolling for a while, but I think there are too many people in the pew who are saying something is getting hinky here.
Yeah. Well, I cannot believe that the majority of our churches or those in our churches are happy about the direction if they understand and know what it is.
Yeah.
But many of them are just saying, all right, let's just cut our losses and go.
Yeah.
We're tired of this. We're not going to pay for this anymore. And I understand that. I mean, I wouldn't fault any man's conscience who said, I just can't participate in this anymore. I mean, it's between him and God and church and God. But I do think there's reasons to stay in and try to contend. No,
I do too. I mean, look, I'm kind of like Groucho. I'd hate to belong to any organization that would have me as a member. I mean, I'm astonished that they even let me show up or something and wear a badge. But, having seen, first, when I was in Jim Crow era as a kid, I would see restrooms like men, women, colored, or in my youth, the blacks were in the balcony and we were downstairs at the theater and we were separated. So it was just crazy time in a lot of ways. And then for them to say, oh, it's terrible, I say, you have no historical perspective. I mean, do you realize what this was like? And so I would say to people and it's not a sin. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention is not the kingdom.
Right, sure.
That, and there is stuff to be upset about. But I would say, look, it was really crazy time back then, and yet we stuck with it. And I think, look, part of it was, when I see people really upset about the condition, the racial things or whatever, you need to get out more. You need to go to Sudan. You need to go to India. You need to find out, and why are people streaming here if it's so terrible? And so I think you need to get some perspective. This is really fairly wonderful, and I've been through an unbelievable renewal. Very few denominations go through what we did, and so I kind of think it's very doable. Particularly, the culture did not have the wind at our back about inerrancy. They were kind of cheering the guys to get more liberal. I think we're getting more and more of the culture at our back. When I grew up in Arkansas, we were about 20 years behind California. They would wear Nehru jackets and, whatever. And then we finally get narrow jackets after they'd moved on or something. And I think that in certain places, CRTs, it was really hot and it's the coolest thing. And we have the grievance and all these HR people bringing in counselors and sensitivity. And it's kind of, to me, on the downward slope a bit now. And we're just discovering like it's the hot new thing. And I think we're very PR oriented. We're just thinking, like us. We want the world to say, well done. You guys have all the proper sensitivities. And I'm just thinking, look, we're late to the party. We're looking silly. We're wearing the tux and it's a costume party, or we're wearing the costume and it's a tux party. I think awakening's going to happen too. Honestly, I think that things are so deplorable now nationwide that people are going to say, this is crazy, and I think God may move. But I really do have hope. I don't gainsay the others. By the way, being at Wheaton sure helped, because that was not Southern Baptist land. I mean, there's Southern Baptist churches up there. But all this stuff about deputation for missions, where churches do that, but that was all they did. And so the missionaries out there trying to keep those letters supporting those 5 churches, and they have a split, and then he has to come home. And and by the way, you can be non-denominational, and that thing can go bad really quickly. Sure. I mean, what's this Valhalla you're running to? Cecil Sims was the state exec in Northwest, pardon for the cough, but was the state exec in the Northwest Association, which was Washington and Oregon. Mm-hmm. And he said a lot of guys come west, and then they throw off the Southern Baptist Convention, and we're just annoyed, and you have to promote this. And, the old pastor would watch the train come by every time, just sit there in the parking lot and watch the train. They asked him, why are you doing that every day? He says, the only thing comes through town I don't have to push, and I just love to look at it. So here it's Lottie Moon, it's Annie Armstrong, it's Seminary Day, it's whatever. And so they get out there and they get liberated. And then after a while they say there's one thing worse than being a Southern Baptist and getting all that literature from the CLC about Stewardship Sunday and Lottie Moon and stuff, and it's not being a Southern Baptist and not getting that stuff. And it is quite an extraordinary structure, and the missionaries are supported. I mean, they're given home and car and the Margaret Fund for college education, and they get furloughs that are supported, and they're doing some amazing stuff out there. And I just think, I don't know that I'm walking from the SBC into heaven. And I've already been given the cooperative program through my years to people who denied that the axe had floated, but we've got a handle on it, and I'd say let's use it. Yeah, well, it's not going to happen apart from intentionality and determination. Right, and I'm glad you've addressed it. I mean, I've read some of your material on that. Yeah, well, we've got to, and I think it's worth it, well worth it. And, man, again, Dr. Coppenger, just cannot express enough to you my appreciation for you and your faithfulness across so many years and your involvement with the Institute of Public Theology. I mean, I'm just thrilled. Tom, thank you. And it is a real joy. I mean, just getting back in the classroom, but with these folks is particularly exciting. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you for listening to this conversation. And if you have wondered about the Founders Conference 2022, you weren't able to make it, those sessions are now all available in the Armory, and you can access the Armory by becoming a Founders Alliance member. We want to thank our Founders Alliance members for supporting us month by month, enabling us to put on this podcast and produce the other content that we have coming out regularly. So thanks again for joining us.